This is Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time, episode number 25. I'm giving you permission to change your mind. Hello again, and thank you for joining me for Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time. I'm Michael Blackston, your host, and you're sitting in the passenger seat alongside me as we commute, this time on my way home from Clinton, North Carolina. I've been working since Monday morning, and it's now Wednesday evening at 7:32 Eastern Time, and I'm recording this podcast with you beside me, listening to me run my mouth. And I'm going to talk about giving you permission. Well, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to give you permission to change your mind. That's not easy to do, at least for me. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that you're stubborn. You're hard-headed. You don't want to change your mind once you've committed to something. And commitment is a good thing. For the most part, it's a really good thing. But sometimes, logistically, you have to make a change. And for me, I know it's very hard to want to do that and to give myself permission to change my mind. So in telling you the 4 stories that I'm going to tell you about, the things that I've had to deal with in this past week about changing my mind on how I'm going to handle some things, which it may seem, if you've listened to this podcast a little redundant, but I promise these are different things. This is different stuff. I've always got something going on in my life. A lot of things going on in my life, so there's always the opportunity for me to change my mind or go down a new direction for something. But I'm going to share these stories with you because hopefully, if you're the type of person like me who really hates to change your mind and you feel like doing that all the time, it feels like you're spinning your wheels in the mud, then maybe this podcast episode will help you with understanding that it's okay, and in it, I am going to give you permission to change your mind. So 4 things have been going on in my life here lately. A couple of them were fairly serious things in commitments that I made. A couple of them were just ho-hum things that you would say that's no big deal, and it's true. But the fact that I changed my mind and went a different direction warranted me telling you the story, because that's what the topic is about. So what I do the first time? Well, the first story is a fairly big one, because I've been going over this and trying to decide what I wanted to do for several weeks now, and it involves this podcast and the website that I send you to for it. I may have mentioned a couple of times that I was thinking about changing roadnoisepodcast.com from one website to another, or changing the website. It wasn't a complete rebuild. It was, just as I just said, changing it from one carrier to another. When I started this podcast, I started it with a complete bootstrap situation. I'm paying for Libsyn podcast hosting, but that's it. I didn't want to pay for a website host to host the website for this for another fee per month. And there are several opportunities out there for hosts that you can build your own website absolutely free. And they're beautiful and they're easy to use. And I like the ones that are what you see is what you get. They call that WYSIWYG. So if you see something that says WYSIWYG and you're wondering what they're talking about when they're talking about websites, it's what you see is what you get. Drag and drop. Easy builder, because I don't know code. I don't want to learn code. And I was using Wix.com. And as I talk about moving from Wix.com to a different carrier for my website, I'm not saying anything bad about Wix, because it's a really wonderful place to have a website, especially if it's not something that you mind possibly losing in the future. And I'll explain that in just a minute. And it's part of the reason I did decide to change. But it's a big deal for me, because I spent a lot of time working on the Road Noise podcast, working on the look, fixing the art. Every time I would upload a new podcast episode, I would spend a lot of time on that. Well, the problem is I don't have a lot of time to spend on some of this stuff. I am also not a rich guy who can afford to pay somebody to do it. So there's kind of my crossroads. I don't have the time, nor do I have the funds to pay somebody to do it for me. I needed a solution that was simpler, that would look good, that would offer all of the features that I wanted for the website, that wouldn't cost me anything more, and also that I would own. I'm going to use WordPress, for example. If you have a blog and you go start your blog on WordPress.com, that's well and good. It doesn't cost you a dime. You can set it up and an hour later post your first blog and then post a million blogs after that if you want to, and never pay a red cent for it. That's WordPress.com. But successful bloggers will tell you not to use WordPress.com if you want to do anything more than post a few blogs and have a few people listen. If you want to grow and if you want to have control over your web page, you need to go to WordPress.org, a separate entity. I don't know, I assume they're owned by the same people, but it's two separate things. So when I say I've got a WordPress blog, I'm not telling you that I went and got a free blog at WordPress.com, which I did at first, but I have a WordPress.org blog hosted for a monthly fee through GoDaddy. And GoDaddy's not the only one. You can get HostGator and I think Bluehost and some several different places that you can pay for hosting, and then you upload the application from WordPress.org to your host and you work it that way. The difference is these free sites like Yola and Wix and WordPress.com, they own your site. Now, they're not going to do anything with it. They're not going to be, for all I know, they're not taking your information and throwing it out there and using your content and your pictures and stuff like that and throwing it out there. But basically what it means is if they go under or they decide to shut their doors, and from time to time a company will do that without any warning, it's over. You've spent all this time and all of your content is gone, and there's probably or usually no way to get it back. However, when you use a service like WordPress.org and you pay for it, you're saying, this is my content, I'm paying for it, and you own it. You can move it wherever you want to. And so anyone who has run a podcast for a while or a blog for a while will tell you, you want to own your content. And I wanted to own my content with road noise, but I also, like I said, wanted something simpler. And I realized that the host for the podcast, Libsyn, I realized offers a sort of web page. It's not the most attractive thing in the world, and it's not the most cutting edge with all the bells and whistles and a bunch of flashing stuff. But one thing I'm finding as I'm doing this content creation is people don't want that. People want to get down to the nitty-gritty. You want me to get right to the topic. You don't want me... I mean, you might want to hear about what I've done during the week, and you might want to hear the review, but if I've got a title for this podcast that catches your interest enough for you to press play, you want me to go on and get to it. That's why I've started working this topic at the beginning of the podcast instead of telling you about my week first. So I finally pulled the trigger and redirected www.roadnoisepodcast.com to the Libsyn website, and I like it better. The show notes are right there on the front of the page. Everything I want to write as show notes is right there. I have the option for more show notes later if I want to do something different. I think I can, but what is there works. It's simple. It's got my information on it. It's got a player for you to press play. You play it right from the host where I'm hosting it. It also is available on all the podcatchers that it normally is. Nothing has changed. It's just that when you go to www.roadnoisepodcast.com, you're not going to see the same website. But it was like pulling teeth for me to do that because I worked so hard on all of that stuff for the other website, and it looked nice. This one is simpler, but it is also sleeker because of that and just easier. And as a result, I have noticed twice this week an enormous spike in downloads. I couldn't figure out why, but it happened because I changed. And somebody listened on Libsyn, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just went to michaelblackston.com. I mean, not michaelblackston.com. I'm sorry. That is one of my websites, but roadnoisepodcast.com. But what I noticed was that there was somebody who had shared and tweeted episodes of Road Noise in several different places, and because of that, I'd gotten more listeners, a snowball effect. And that really excited me at the beginning of this week, and I noticed another one last night, and that's when I kind of started doing the research to figure out where in the world was this coming from. And it's because someone started sharing it, and it's because I made this change. Why? Because the way they've got the social sharing buttons configured, at every episode, not just at the top of the page, but at every episode, you can share that episode right there. And that's not a feature that I had working on the Wix.com site. So I made a change, and it was for the better. My advice to you, if you've got a change that you think you'd like to make, is just think it through and weigh out the pros and cons. Write them down if you have to. Another thing that happened for me this week that I consider a fairly big deal, it may not to you, but as you know, I'm novelizing Mr. Long Said Nothing, the play I wrote a couple of years ago, and several years ago now. I'm novelizing it, and I dedicated and mentioned on this podcast a couple of times ago that I'm writing 2,000 words a day, or was writing 2,000 words a day. That's a huge commitment, especially when I put out a weekly blog. And up until recently, I was putting out 2 blog posts a week, but I stopped because I wanted to be able to focus enough of my time on getting 2,000 words per day for Mr. Long Said Nothing. A novel is anywhere from 60,000 to 80,000 words on average, so I figured in 40 days of hitting that 2,000 word count, I'd have my first draft of the novel ready to go, and I could move forward with the second, third, and fourth drafts. But I realized I was having trouble getting that. I could get 1,000, I could even get 1,200, but just with the way my schedule is and my timing, I was having a hard time, and I had to make a hard decision. Okay, I'm going to allow myself to take longer writing this novel and back off to 1,000 words a day. It may seem like nothing to you, but for me it was a big deal. I had a hard time telling myself it was okay to do that. I felt like backing off to 1,000 words a day was slacking. 1,000 words a day is less than my average blog post. My average blog post is in the ballpark of 1,200. So I felt like I was slacking off. I felt like I was shirking my responsibility by saying, okay, I'm going to back off. And I had to realize, no, it's just making room for everything on my schedule that I can't afford to let go. I don't want to let go of this novelization, but I've got to make a change that will allow me to be able to finish it. So it'll take me 60 to 80 days instead of 30 or 40. So that was another thing, and it really was a weight lifted off my shoulders once I realized it's okay to change my mind. Now, this next one's a big one to me. I keep wanting to, because I'm an insecure artist, I keep wanting to underplay the value of these decisions. The last one is not that big of a deal, but the first 3 are. You've heard me speak about a forthcoming podcast called the Artist Brainstorm that I've had in my head. Let me take a drink of my Coke Zero here because I'm hearing myself starting to make dry mouth noises on this microphone, and I do not want to have to put you through that. There, that ought to be a little better at least. The Artist Brainstorm is a podcast that I've been thinking about and trying to put into development and doing some planning on, that is all about helping other artists in all sorts of artistic fields figure out a way to make money with their art. It was an entrepreneurial type podcast idea, and I really still believe that if I ever go there or someone does something like this, it will be very good, very popular, a good thing to do as a service to other artists. But it would require a lot of work. It would require a lot of time I still do not have. I'm backing off on word counts on my novel. Adding a new podcast that requires me to interview people in every episode, and I really don't believe that anything less now than a weekly podcast is going to gain much ground. That just seems to be the sweet spot with consistency of a podcast. People like it to be weekly. And so I had to make another decision. Well, I'd been knocking around resurrecting my very first podcast. It was called the Everything Arts Podcast with Michael Blackston. And my idea for it was to just give you a lot of great information about all aspects of the arts. And I got a little disgruntled with it after a few episodes. I think I got up to 12 episodes because my idea at first was that I wanted to interview people. I wanted people to join me on microphone, and I would talk about their aspect of the arts. And I was dead set on it being an interview podcast. I didn't think, honestly, I was undervaluing myself as a host and as a content provider all by myself. And the truth of the matter is I'm so very, very busy that I really need to focus on podcasts right now. If I'm going to have more than one, especially, this one I'm driving anyway. But if I'm going to add one that takes time out of my day when I'm not driving, it really needs to be something I can do on the spur of the moment, and not have to get an interview every time. And I got jaded and disgruntled with the first one because I couldn't get anybody but Tony King to come on the podcast and talk to me. And Tony came on a couple of times, and we had a couple of great episodes talking about theater, live theater, and stage performance and things like that I decided to cancel that podcast and start another one called the Q1 Go, or called Q1 Go the Theater Show. Actually, Tony King came up with it. I called her and said, hey, look, she had mentioned that if I ever did theater podcast episodes, she would like to be a part of them. She'd had so much fun. So I said, well, what do you think about being a co-host for every 2-week podcast that's all about theater? And we did, and we got up to, I can't remember how many episodes. I think we got up to 25, and we called it quits just because there was no growth, and theater is such a small niche. But the arts still is in the back of my mind. And I have realized through doing this, and as I've grown and as I've listened and I've learned about podcasting and public speaking and providing content, that it's not the number of people. It's not flash. It's about content. It's about relationships that you build with people, and it's about how they feel about you. And I've found that while, like with this podcast, it's very slow growth, when people do listen, generally, they like it, and they like me. And so they want to come back. And it's hard to be found, but when I am found, I'm finding that people are staying a little more and a little more. So I've decided, instead, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do the Artist Brainstorm, at least right now. If something happens in my life and I'm able to stay home with my family all of the time, and I can dedicate some time to spend, say, 2 days recording a month worth of interviews, that's one thing. But right now I can't do that. However, I have a lot of alone time in hotel rooms after I've written my 1,000 words, and I'm sitting there and wondering what to do, twiddling my fingers, taking extra long baths, and watching marathons of Storage Wars on the television. I've got time in my hotel rooms that I can record episodes of the Everything Arts Podcast. And now I don't worry about having, or I will not be worrying about having to have an interview for every episode. It's going to mostly be me I'll have to do a little research, but it'll mostly be things that I already know about. And if it's not, I'll do a little research and find out about it. And I'm going to give you some content on all aspects of the arts for the Everything Arts podcast that I'm going to resurrect. And there are a few people that I've talked to that are willing to sit down with me and have a couple of interviews, but it's not going to be a staunch interview podcast. And then lastly, the change of mind that I had was about the topic of the show. When I was writing down topic ideas and planning out this episode on my way to Clinton, North Carolina, I decided that I had, let me back up, I had written a blog post. My comedy blog is at michaelblackston.com, and I'd love for you to go there and read. It's an article-style blog, but it's funny, and when you need a good laugh, you can go there and hear me or read me being silly. And I had written one recently about me being a stupid kid doing stupidly stupid things. And 2 of the 3 stories I shared in that involved my cousin. It turned out to be a fairly popular blog post, and I got a lot of comments both on the WordPress site and on my Facebook page. And so I decided that maybe it was time to do a storytelling episode and tell about some of the nonsense and shenanigans my cousin and I got into as we were kids. And so that was what the topic was going to be about. But as I started changing my mind this week, and I realized that's something that people need to know, or at least people need to maybe hear my story about and find that it's okay to change your own mind in whatever's going on in your life, I decided I'm going to change my mind, and I'm going to do an episode on changing your mind. So that's what I did, and that's what this episode is about. So to wrap it up, I know so many times we plan to do something and we get our minds around it and we get excited about it. There's anticipation and anxiety about getting it done. I'm the one that will harp and really hit on you about focus and finishing what you start. But there are times when you need to change your mind for the better. It's not always going to feel good, but then sometimes, like some of these have for me, it's a burden that lifts off your shoulders. Sometimes you don't realize what kind of weight you're putting on yourself by making some decisions that you stick to that really aren't necessarily the best decisions. Sometimes you have to step back and punt. That's what I call it a lot of times. Because life's too short to make yourself do something that isn't going to get you anywhere. I'm all about priority and focus, but I am all about doing that in a procedure and a project that makes sense. And if you're in the middle of doing something and you realize it just doesn't make sense, or you're overburdening yourself, or it just needs to change a little bit, sometimes we kick against it and don't want to change just because. So I'm giving you permission to think it through, whatever it is in your life that you might need to change your mind on. Think it through. Figure out who it's going to affect. Is it going to hurt anybody? What are the pros? What are the cons? And if the good outweighs the bad on the decision, pull the trigger and change your mind. You have my permission. So my week, this being the week after Easter, has been pretty much what I summed up there. Just decisions that I've made. I came to North Carolina, Clinton, North Carolina, and I had 3 stones to do. Every one of them involved portraits. Every one of them was in color. To say the least, my hand is about to kill me. So I'm glad to be on my way home. Easter was nice. It wasn't, I really have to say, it wasn't really anything to write home about. I feel kind of bad because I feel like as a Christian, I've started letting myself get involved too much in the worldly traditions of the holidays I'm supposed to be celebrating. And while I do remember the reasons for the seasons and all that and all the cliches that you're used to hearing, sometimes I just let it pass me by and I don't realize it until it's gone. It happened at Christmas, and it kind of happened this year at Easter. Easter made a lot more sense to me because I was just so busy working and I've been out of town. But it came and it went, and it was Easter, and I think I've decided that I'm going to sit down and, for the second time, I'm going to watch The Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson movie that was released several years ago. I don't know if you've seen it. Most people have seen it. If you're not a believer, it probably, well, I won't say probably, it might not move you. If you are a believer, it will absolutely move you. If you are not a believer, it might well move you. But the thing about it is the story of the crucifixion of Christ told with no holds barred. It is absolutely grueling to watch. It is hard to watch. It's bloody. It's gory. And it had to be, because when they made this movie, the whole point was to not show the easy side of crucifixion. They wanted to show crucifixion for what it was. The most horrific thing, the most painful, torturous thing a human can go through. And Christ did that on the cross. And for a Christian who believes he did that willingly for us, that is huge and powerful. And when I first saw it, I was just beside myself with emotion. And it made me change my mind, honestly, about some things in my life. It made me rededicate some things. But I think maybe it's time for that again. I think maybe I need to watch that again. I haven't watched it since then because of the power that that movie has for me and the emotion. I don't want it to become stale. I don't want to see it so much that it becomes ho-hum. I want, when I watch it, to be something that moves me fresh. And it's been, I saw it at the movie theater, and I have not watched it since. I do own it on DVD, and I think it's time to watch it again. And I'm debating whether or not to let my son watch it. He's 12, and the imagery is so graphic. I just don't know if I want to let him watch it yet, but I may. I'm not sure. I haven't decided. And then when I was in Clinton this week, Monday, my wife calls me up in the middle of the day saying, my throat hurts. She knew her throat. She told me earlier when she woke up her throat was hurting real bad. And she was at work, and she had gotten sicker and sicker and couldn't get better. They finally said, go to the doctor. You feel awful, we can tell. Go to the doctor. So she left work early, went to the doctor, and the diagnosis, strep throat. And I'm thinking, that's great, because I'd gotten myself a little sugar from my wife, kissed on her a little bit right before I left, the night before and right before I left, and I thought, great, now I'm going to get it. Of course, that wasn't my first thought. My first thought was, of course, to make sure that my wife was okay, and that from several miles away and several hours away, I was able to provide her what she needed, and she had everything she needed. She was fine. The doctor gave her some antibiotics and some pain medication, and she was fine. He told her to stay out of work the next day, and then she should be fine to go back today, which she did, and she's feeling a lot better. But strep throat is very contagious, and I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop. I'm waiting for my voice to start getting scratchy and start feeling a little sore. It hasn't yet, so hopefully it won't. But anyway, that's pretty much my week. Finished my work, and I'm on my way home and recording this episode, and I'll release it on Friday. And the positive review for this week is a book that I've read twice, and it's a book that I highly recommend for writers. Actually, if you like learning new things and you're not necessarily a writer, you might enjoy it anyway. But I'm thinking that, it's mostly going to be writers that are going to enjoy this book. And it's by Stephen King, and it's called On Writing. And the first half of the book tells his biography, the biography of his childhood mainly, how he came to be Stephen King, how he came to be the person that is wrapped around that head of his that pushes out all of these books and has for decades. And then the second half of the book is how he goes about writing and his philosophy on writing, what it means, cutting to the chase, getting rid of some of the crap that some of the people want to do. Who, you've always got the artists who want to seem wise and better than you, and so they get really deep and philosophical, and he likes to cut through that crap and get to being a storyteller. Who makes a good storyteller, why they make a good storyteller, and what you, if you are a storyteller, need to do in order to become a writer and write well. And that's what the book is about. And it's called Stephen King's On Writing. And once I get my Amazon affiliates and all that stuff going up, I'll have this up on the show notes and on the page where you can actually purchase the book using my affiliate link. I don't have that yet, but if you'll go to the website, roadnoisepodcast.com, whenever you hear this, maybe by then it's up. So we'll see. Anyway, Stephen King's On Writing, my positive review for this week. If you've got the hankering to get in touch with me, here's how you can do it. I've got a brand new hotline. The number is 706-408-7456. That's 706-408-7456. You can also get in touch with me via email at feedback@michaelblackston.com. That's feedback@michaelblackston.com. I encourage you to go visit the brand new webpage that I've changed everything over to. It's still at www.roadnoisepodcast.com, and you can share it. Oh, please share it. Please share the podcast with all of your faithful friends, and you can tweet it out and all kinds of good stuff. So go there, and I would love for you to go and check out my comedy blog at michaelblackston.com. And lastly, if you'd go to iTunes and leave a review and a ranking for me, that helps me to get seen. So that's this episode of Road Noise Life 1 Mile at a Time. I'm Michael Blackston. Thank you so much for sitting in the passenger seat alongside me, listening to me run my mouth as I commute from North Carolina on my way home, and we learn to live life 1 mile at a time.